morning. I'm really delighted to welcome you on such a beautiful Saturday morning back to the law school. Now, this morning's tribute to Dean Steinheimer is obviously a bittersweet occasion. There is nobody in living memory who has done more for Washington and Lee's Law School than Roy L. Steinheimer, Jr. He remains the dean. I've had the good fortune of having met Dean Steinheimer. There is no doubt that even after his retirement, he remained impressive and formidable. But I have heard enough to appreciate that I will never know what it must have been like to be in his 8 a.m. UCC class. Admittedly, I needed to see a picture of Dean Steinheimer in his plane before I could believe that the name the Sky Dean was actually meant literally and not somehow figuratively. From my perspective, his national recruitment efforts have perhaps more than anything else reshaped and reconfigured the law school. Without him, we would not have any women. Admittedly, we may not be accredited to that. And we may have fewer diverse alumni. We would not have as many graduates of fine institutions from the Northeast, including my own alma mater, Bates College. Single-handedly, Dean Steinheimer began to move the law school from a good, all-male institution to compete against the top law schools around the country. Thanks to him, our alumni now are literally everywhere. And that's a legacy on which we have built and will continue to build forever. Upon my appointment as dean, the law faculty and the university bestowed upon me the Steinheimer professorship, which I considered a great honor. But I did not fully understand what it meant and how much he meant to our alumni until I received an email from an alumna shortly after my appointment. She gracefully congratulated me upon the deanship, then noted that she was unclear what was the greater honor, to hold the Steinheimer professorship or to become the dean of the law school. And finally, she admonished me to treat the professorship with the appropriate deference and decorum. That taught me a lesson. And as I'm stepping down from the deanship, I have greater appreciation than ever before for Dean Steinheimer, who after all was the dean for 17 years, and am prouder than ever to hold the professorship in his name. It is now time to start off the remembrances. The first person to speak will be our president, Ken Ruscio, to be followed by Professor Mark Grunwald, Darlene Moore, Dean Steinheimer's daughter, Sarah Diggs, and then three of our alumni, Judge Miller, one of the notorious Roy's boys, Congressman Goodlett, one of those recruited to leave the cold Northeast to come down here, and Judge Jip Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, and good morning to everyone. Many of you knew Roy better than I did, and in just a few minutes, colleagues and friends will share memories of the legendary Washington and Lee figure. Those memories will be personal ones, undoubtedly inspirational, undoubtedly descriptive of his many accomplishments. Some will be quite serious, some will be definitely humorous. They will call to mind a man of integrity and intelligence, fairness and persuasiveness. They will remind you that his fashion sense was what might be charitably described as representative of the pre-Vineyard Vines period. You will hear how his hands were tied. You will find yourself recalling what it means to be Roy. So I will mention just a few things and then get out of the way for the good stuff. First, on behalf of another legend, let me read what Bob Huntley wanted to say today, but he couldn't because of some health issues back at Kendall. As you know, Bob was president while Roy was dean. Indeed, the president who famously hired Roy. Until Roy passed away, the two of them would spend every afternoon over in Kendall over a drink or two. If only those daily commentaries had been recorded for posterity. But in any case, this is from Bob. Roy Steinheimer was truly one of a kind. When I became president of W&L in 1968, my first important task was to find and appoint a dean of our law school. It was clear to me that much work was required from a skilled and knowledgeable person to take our law school to the level which its past and its reputation justified. Students must be recruited from many parts of the nation, new faculty must be found, and a new building must be designed and erected to house the rejuvenated school. The task was frighteningly large and could only be attacked by one of enormous ability, tireless energy, and boundless optimism. I thought my chance of finding such a person was remote, if not impossible, and after interviewing a number of others approaching despair, I stumbled on Roy. Within hours, it was clear that he was the answer to a prayer. Roy came here determined to succeed, and succeed he did. Soon we were brimming with superlative students. An excellent faculty was already here, but many were approaching retirement and more were required. Roy found them. Blessedly, a devoted alumnus named Sidney Lewis and his wife Frances from Richmond, Virginia, stepped forward and gave $9 million to build the new school. We were off and running. Roy led the charge with determination, skill, and tireless work. He also became my close personal friend, and I will miss him. I've commented that it seems W&L truly has a guardian angel. Often in its history, events and needs have seemed about to overwhelm this little school. Always, talented leaders have stepped forward to redeem it, and it has thrived and strengthened. Roy was such a leader. And so is Bob, for that matter. I went into our archives this past week to unearth the story of how Bob and Roy found each other and how the Michigan law faculty member became the dean of our law school. It was a different time. The search committee consisted of Bob Huntley as chair and sole member. He called many prospective candidates, didn't like any of them, and finally called someone at Michigan who said, "You really needed to talk to this guy, Steinheimer." Bob was told that Steinheimer had a plane and could just fly down to Lexington for the meeting. Bob suspected that not having an airport in Lexington might get in the way of such a plane. But he was out of options. He invited Roy to come on down, gave him the coordinates, and said he'd come over and pick him up when he landed. I'll let Roy take up the story from there, as recounted in a 2010 interview. This is Roy. It was just a cow pasture, and it was kept mowed and so forth. There were no tenants there or anything else, just a pasture that was kept mowed. You were welcome to take your chances and go in there if you wanted to, but Bob had said, "We've got an airport here." I said, "I'll plan just to land at the airport, and I'll call you when I get there." So Jane and I, my dear wife, who participated with me very closely in everything I did, got in my beach bonanza and flew down to Lexington. We were a little surprised at what the airport consisted of. But it was flyable, and I could tell it was flyable, so I went in and landed. There was no attendant there or anything, so I had to walk to a farmhouse that was nearby. I walked to the farmhouse and told them I'd like to use their telephone, and they let me use the telephone. I called Bob and said, "I'm here at the airport." He came out, picked me up, and Jane and I came into the campus with him. We visited and had lunch together and so forth, the usual, and got acquainted. Nothing really specific was talked about as far as what the elements of the job would be. It was just a get acquainted sort of session. And the rest, as they say, is history. At W&L, we tell our institutional history through stories. When you've been around for about 270 years and have been blessed with such a wealth of colorful characters, you can explain our values, our principles, our virtues, our mission, our priorities, by describing the people who made the university. If you want to understand the School of Law, you have to understand Roy Steinheimer. If you want to know what is important to us, you need to recognize what was important to Roy. If you want to know who we are, you need to know who Roy was. We are defined by the people who have made us. And it is hard to imagine anyone who has met more at the School of Law in its recent history, maybe its entire history, than Roy Steinheimer. So as you hear the stories this morning, listen for those moments when the qualities of the man and the qualities of the school are indistinguishable. Today, even as we remember Roy, we recall the place of the School of Law in legal education and in the profession. The stories of the man in the school are pretty much one and the same.
I'm Pam White, class of '77 Law, and my most vivid memory when I envision Roy Steinheimer is that awful Madras jacket. We each have particular memories of Sky Dean Roy Steinheimer in Lewis Hall, in Tucker Hall. Some memories are special, some not so much. I remember one of his UCC exams as a living nightmare. My worst grade in law school was the UCC exam. I was most embarrassed by that grade because Dean Steinheimer was the official reporter for the Uniform Commercial Code. He literally wrote the book, he wrote the law. The nightmare remained vivid, the cold sweat refreshed even 10 years later when I was appointed a bar examiner and assigned to prepare and grade the entire UCC section. All I could think to do was to call Dean Steinheimer and beg for his advice. He did not laugh out loud, but he did not miss a beat to respond to say, of course, he'd be pleased to help. He sent me 10 years worth of UCC exam questions, his analyses, representative answers, and he saved my life. He urged me sincerely, I knew it to be true, to call with any concerns. Perhaps he wanted to save W&L's reputation from being besmirched by my ignorance. But the reality was that Dean Steinheimer wanted all of his alums to succeed, to prosper, to thrive, to love the law, to love the practice. He was very proud of each of us. His commitment to us as members of the W&L community, to each of us, did not end when he handed us our sheepskins. He knew and appreciated that special challenges faced women students in law class, on campus, moving into law practice. He was the one who joked that our training as the rare females on campus in the 70s necessarily helped us to being the only female bar examiner, the only female law partner, the only female in the courtroom as litigators. He cared for us and he cared about us. He knew that we had a bumpy road, but his vision as law dean for Washington and Lee law students and alums was not limited by stereotyping based on gender or race. His pragmatic good sense, his collegiality, his civility, his demonstrated equanimity, and his genuine good humor, notwithstanding those jackets, all of it rubbed off on each of us. I came to appreciate the dean's legacy, his vision, long after his deanship ended, as I served on the Law Council beginning in the 80s and then on the Board of Trustees. The dean's role and his continuing influence had propelled our tiny law school into national prominence, synonymous with excellence in legal education, and also serving as the crown jewel in the university's status. It is not mere coincidence that our alums continue to rank disproportionately high in number as ABA presidents, as business leaders, as legislators, as judges, as respected and honored practitioners in law. In 1992, one of those ABA presidents and a former trustee, Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, presented his archived papers and lauded Dean Steinheimer for his work, his service for his leadership, for leading the transformation of the law school. The lasting image that I have of Dean Steinheimer was crystal clear in my mind's eye as I served as a trustee during the Capitol campaign that began in 1999. 1999 was the 250th anniversary of this university and the 150th anniversary of our law school. The Capitol campaign that extended from 99 to 2003 was entitled On the Shoulders of Giants. Dean Steinheimer was my giant. He was one of the giants, and it is on his shoulders that all of us proudly stand.
I'm Mark Grunwald, a member of the faculty here, and I'm very honored to be a part of this tribute to Roy. I have a story to tell, the kind of story that Ken referred to, but before I do that, I'm going to do something that's a bit dangerous. I'm going to quote some of my own words, and I feel a bit maybe like the chemist who's mixing some chemicals and gets intoxicated with the fumes of his own mixture. But when I looked back yesterday at something I had written for the Law News in their tribute issue to Roy that was done about a month ago, I thought it really fits nicely with my story. So I began by saying the following. I'm going to read this. Again, forgive the possible sense of intoxication, but Roy was one of the last old-style law deans in the country. The law school was his law school. The faculty was his faculty. The students were his students. He ran the place almost single-handedly. Now, here's the interesting thing about that notion. I think I'm right in the way I describe Roy. You all can be the judges. But there's a problem. Most law deans think they run the law schools. and some do, but the problem is the faculties in law schools also think they run the law school. And the trick in being the kind of dean that Roy was being able to navigate that tension, to in fact run the law school while keeping the faculty relatively happy with the notion that it was really running the law school. So here's my story. When I decided I was interested in law teaching, I went through a process that's still the process today for lawyers who want to become law teachers. The Association of American Law Schools sponsors a conference. And the nature of this conference is you send in your resumes, your resume. Law schools that might be interested in interviewing you ask you to interview. It's all done in a big city, in a large hotel, and everyone is moving around from room to room in the hotel. And these are, of course, preliminary interviews, but that's how it went even as long ago as my entry into the law teaching market. So I had a number of interviews, and one of them was with Washington and Lee. Now, the way these interviews are usually set up, the committee, and they've become a little larger than the committee that Ken referred to, and now they've become much larger. But the committee is in a hotel room, and you know to go to, if you've got an interview with Washington and Lee, you go to that particular room. I had an interview, and I walked into the room, and this gives you some of the picture in detail. There were three people sitting in the room. Uncas McPhenia, Lash LaRue, and Roger Groot. Now, there was something missing, however, because every other interview I had had, and all the interviews I had that followed that, and the pattern still holds today, there's a group of faculty members, and then there's also the dean. But there was no dean to be seen in this room. It was just Roger, Lash, and Uncas, we had a very nice conversation. It was both pleasant and substantive. Kept wondering, where the dean is. Maybe this is the second string that's interviewing me, and the dean is with the first string team. But that didn't seem right either, because those were quite formidable people, as you know. So the interview ended, we shook hands, and you go out of an interview like any, not knowing for sure what's going to happen. But I did go out puzzled by not meeting the dean from Washington. So later in the day, I got back to my hotel room, and there was a phone message. Please call Dean Steinheimer from Washington and Lee. So I thought, he missed the interview with me. He must have been out for some reason, just wants to call to apologize for missing it. Well, when I called him back, that was not the case at all. Dean Steinheimer said, Mr. Grunwald, I'd like you to come up to my room if you could, and I'd like to chat with you a little. Something like, I'm not going to do too many Roy voice imitations. I can't do it, really. And here's what happened. I can't remember, it's interesting, I can't remember whether he was wearing one of those jackets or not, but I do remember very much thinking, after about the first 15, 20 minutes of what turned out to be an hour session with Roy, that this was the real interview. I'd had my introduction to Washington and Lee from Roger Lash and Uncas, and now I was being put through my paces. Again, ended pleasantly. I was very impressed with Roy, of course. Easy to be. And I left, again, not knowing what would happen. But I did sort of have this picture of there's the faculty, and then there's the dean, who probably is in charge of the place. A few days later, I got a call from Roy, and said, Mr. Grunwald, we'd like to join the faculty at Washington and Lee. And the position then, Charles Laughlin was retiring, and I had done quite a bit of labor law. So the idea is that I would do some labor law, but I thought I was going to be hired to do labor law. And he says, Mr. Grunwald, you'll be paid. And that was, that was like a certain number of dollars. And clearly that was not open discussion. He said, of course, you'll be teaching a labor law course and local government law. Now, I knew nothing from local government law. And I said, Dean Steinheimer, I've never done any local government law. I've gotten a couple of parking tickets. And he said, you'll pick it up very quickly, I'm sure. That was the end of that. So if I can return to my words for just a moment, to talk about Roy as running the law school makes him sound somewhat despotic. And what I wrote was the following, because this is really true. Roy was anything but a despot. He led with clarity of purpose, a plain-spoken style, and unquestioned integrity. For sure, the times were simpler then. Yet for those times, nothing less than a Roy Steinheimer could have set the stage to bring W&L law into the world of nationally prominent law schools.
Good morning. I feel quite honored to stand before this group today and talk about our wonderful dean. It was an honor when Elizabeth Branner called me to say that she would like for me to make some comments. Dean Steinheimer was a true gentleman. He always referred to me as Mrs. Moore, and same was true with others working under his leadership. He was known for his short, straight-to-the-point correspondence. I typed many letters for him that only contained 2 to 3 sentences with few words. But he covered exactly what was needed to be said. Most faculty who visited his office did not stay long. Probably because he would push back in his big chair, light up a Camel cigarette, or he would immediately let them know that his hands were tied. There was nothing he could do for them. He was stern and quick to the point. As others have said, he was our Sky Dean, who taught an 8 a.m. class on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and then immediately left after class on Wednesday to drive down to his plane that he had stored down in Weir's Cave, Virginia. He would fly all over the country, recruiting faculty and strong students to attend Washington and Lee Law School. One experience that I would like to share with you is how my employment started with Washington and Lee. On a beautiful sunny day in December 1975, I went for a walk on the colonnade and happened to wander into the law school, which at the time was located in Tucker Hall. I was greeted in the hallway by Dean Steinheimer's secretary at the time, and we started to talk. I told her I previously worked for an attorney in Greenville, North Carolina, as well as working at East Carolina University, while my husband was in undergrad school. Excuse me. She asked me if I was interested in a job, and I said no. Although I had previously worked for an attorney and enjoyed the law work, as well as having enjoyed a university environment, I was not looking for employment at the time, as it was my intention to be a stay-at-home mom. When I got home that Friday afternoon, I received a call from Dean Steinheimer offering me a job. He said his secretary had been impressed with our conversation, and they were in need of a strong staff member who could immediately jump in and start processing exams. During that time, all law exams were processed before the Christmas holiday, and then as soon as the students came back, they were given. And that's different today because now all law exams are processed before we leave for the holiday. The dean offered a starting salary, and Mark Grunwald, please disregard this notice. The dean offered a starting salary, but I mentioned to him that I really wasn't interested in going back to work at this time.
Made a mistake.
He then asked me what salary would be appealing to you. And after thinking for a minute, I stated $1,000 higher than what he offered, knowing that there's no way in 1975 that he would accept that salary. He immediately said, "I'll approve it." And as you can imagine, I was lost for words, immediately asked him to please give me the weekend to think about this offer, that I had to talk with my husband, who knew nothing about my going back to work, and that I would need to find child care. He agreed and asked me to call his office first thing on Monday morning. I kept thinking, how could I not accept this starting salary that he had offered me so kindly? And I could not turn down this man who had a deep, stern, convincing voice. After some negotiating, I called on Monday and accepted the job and began employment with the law school the next day. Since hiring was more casual than it is today, since Dean Steinheimer wanted to get me on those exams right away, Dean Steinheimer asked me to report to work and we would get the paperwork done later. Throughout the years, I remained in contact with Dean Steinheimer. I admired him. He was a man who treated all with dignity and respect. I called Dean Steinheimer last summer or early last fall after the dean and Elizabeth Branner had talked with me about this. And I wanted to tell him that a Law Alumni Association scholarship had been set up in my name and to thank him for all the guidance that he had given me through my career. Being the gentleman that he was, he said, "Mrs. Moore, you worked hard for this honor," and he was proud of me. That was the last conversation I had with him, and that will certainly be something that I will carry with me throughout my lifetime. I was not surprised when the dean asked that a funeral or memorial service not be held for him. He was a proud man that did not want others making a big deal over him. Thank you.
I'm Sarah Dix, and I am the lesser of his stepdaughters. And on behalf of Sister and me, and I'm sure his nieces and nephew, we would like to thank the university and Emily and Elizabeth Branner and Suzanne Wade for putting this together. And I think you have been very, very touched by the whole thing. This is a lovely, lovely way to say goodbye to him. And I thought that you all might enjoy a few stories about Roy that would not be the sorts of things you would have known about him. One story from his early childhood that shows that he had an early interest in banking and negotiable instruments. His family moved from town to town. His father was an educator, since this was in his blood. And they moved from Dodge City, Kansas, where he was born, to another town in Kansas. And his parents were taking him into a bank to set up a new account there. And the bank manager was taking them around the bank and giving them a little tour, and he saw, it was about 5 or 6 at this point, and he saw all these people coming in with their checks and getting their checks cashed and getting money, and so at the end of the little tour, the manager turned to him and said, "Now, young man, what may I do for you?" And he said, "You may give me some money." My sister and I knew that we had stumbled onto something wonderful. I mean, for me, getting to know him personally was an enormous privilege after having been a student. I mean, one that I certainly did not deserve, but was very glad to take advantage of. But we knew we had stumbled onto something wonderful when we discovered how deep and delicious and wicked his wit was. And as evidenced by one evening when he took us to dinner, my mother and my sister and me, at a 5-star restaurant or 4-star restaurant up in the Plains, Virginia. And we went in, and it was this gorgeous dinner. And we were sitting there, and we started laughing. He got us laughing with jokes. And we had long passed the point of being ladylike laughter. We were guffawing. And the other tables were turning around and starting to look at us. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be kicked out of a restaurant because of my parents' behavior. Anyway, and I thought that you might enjoy a tour of Roy's cottage at Kendall, because I think often what is on the walls reflects the person, and it particularly speaks to what Pam was saying. You walked in, and you saw on the wall there was a check that had been made for him by I think the students of the class in 1981 in his commercial transactions class, and it was made on the Madras Bank. It was payable to Dean Steinheimer and it was for happy birthday wishes on his birthday on December 2nd, 1981, and it was signed by all of the students. And I can remember some of the names, and there were people like Ben Mathis and Leanne Galbraith and Nancy Bradford and Morgan Griffiths, and a bunch of different people. And this was on his wall, and he had it, this big thing. It was 4 feet by 3 feet, and it had it laminated, and it hung on the wall of his cottage. And there was a letter from the other professors from his first year as a professor, and it was thanking him for getting him through that first year. And it was something that meant a lot to him. It was signed by Lash LaRue and August Mathenia and a bunch of other greats, many of whom are no longer with us. And then there were photographs of course, Roy's boys. And, you know, none of the, you know, how great I am type things of various diplomas and that sort of thing, except his diploma from Washington and Lee, his honorary diploma from Washington and Lee. And then in his bedroom, there was his treasure chest, is what I called it. But it was a chest that had been made by his first wife, Jane, his beloved Jane, her family in 1790. And in the box were old photographs and letters and all things that were treasures to him. And among those were letters from students and photographs of students from one class who called themselves Roy's Rebels from 1985. And those were his treasures, his students and his colleagues. So thank you all so much for doing this. And that's who he was.
Good morning. Washington and Lee's class of 1973 gathered for the first time in September of 1970 on the walkway leading up to Tucker Hall. There are a few of us from that class that are here today, and we will recall that it was 101 degrees. It was so hot that people thought other people were going to pass out. Of course, this was the first collection of this group. Most people didn't know each other. 1970, Vietnam. A lot of emotion. There were people in three-piece wool suits, perspiring like they had never perspired in the past and probably never in the future. There were people with shorts and sandals that laced up above their knees. There were quote-unquote gentlemen with 2 briefcases to get ready to go in to register. All of these people had been recruited by Roy Steinheimer. Probably in the fall of 1969, he had arrived in 1968, so that was the uniqueness of this class. In reflection, I think that class fell into 3 distinct categories. There were the returning veterans, who naturally were coming back to start a new life and start a new profession and had lived things that, fortunately, some of us didn't have to experience. There were the married students whose spouses were very, very much interested in making sure that their spouse didn't go over and have to spend time in Southeast Asia like the returning veterans. And there were the bachelors who didn't know what they were doing. And I think Roy knew that. But Roy Steinheimer had a way of connecting with everyone, just as he did with, I assume, everyone in this room. When you ran into Roy Steinheimer at the 25th reunion, and our class was very, very close, a big turnout for reunions, and we still get together on a lot of occasions to see each other, to deal with the tragedies of life or the profession reunions and the retirements. But whenever you saw Roy, it was the handshake and the, you pick up on your name tag, Mr. Miller, good to see you again. And you knew that he meant it. He remembered that he had recruited you for whatever it was. And when we would have the discussions and somebody would bring up, remember when so-and-so clerked for the United States Supreme Court for Mr. Justice Rehnquist? Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. I remember that. I remember that. And he did. He remembered all of those things. So he was close to us. I never, ever heard anyone make a disparaging remark about Roy Steinheimer. And that's hard to say about people, particularly in the law, that you don't run into somebody who's had a bad experience, except for the possible disparaging comment about the sport codes. And people still make comments about, whatever happened to all of those sport codes. And I'm sure we all know they're probably hanging in a secondhand store somewhere that no one has been willing to pick up and run with them. But we did become known as Roy's Boys. I don't know why. There's a photograph out here of our 25th reunion with all of us with Roy behind the wheel of the car. Everybody's so happy about it. But when we get together and meet, it's always talked about Roy's Boys. But when Elizabeth called me and I started thinking about what to say today, I realized that we're no more Roy's Boys than anybody else here. We're all Roy's boys and girls, because we all have that personal connection with Roy Steinheimer that's unique to us, that was special to us, that was special to those UCC classes where you walked down and said, what did he just say? What do those numbers mean? What do those dashes mean? What does all this stuff, how does it go together? But he was truly, truly loved by our class. He was responsible for us as graduates, going on to become, for the most part, successful attorneys and going on to work in the law in their chosen ways. As the representative or the class president of the 73 class, we thank Washington and Lee for all that it gave to us, and most importantly, we thank Roy Steinheimer for his commitment to us and to the school. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure for Mary Ellen and I to be with all of you, especially President Ruscio and Dean Demleitner, but my former classmates, especially Pam White, who are here. This is a wonderful occasion to remember Dean Steinheimer. And I'm here to tell you a story of love and the law and a little bit of politics and a lot of Dean Steinheimer. I first met him in 1973 when the Sky Dean came out of the sky and landed at the airport in Lewiston, Maine. Now, it's a little bigger airport than what's called an airport here in Lexington, but it has been known for pilots to have to overfly because of moose on the runway. So it was a very, very remarkable thing that the dean of a southern law school would fly to Lewiston, Maine and interview the students. Many, many law schools don't send anybody to interview on campus at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, but the dean came. And we hit it off very well because he was the first person I had ever met named Steinheimer, other than my brother-in-law and his family. My brother-in-law, Max Steinheimer, originally from Reno, Nevada, is a wonderful fellow. And I asked Dean Steinheimer if he knew about the Steinheimers from Reno, Nevada. And he said no, but he had flown into the airport in Reno one time. And the fellow at the private aviation desk had told him about the wonderful Steinheimer family in Reno, Nevada. So he came back to Lexington and sent me a letter of admission that I couldn't refuse. It took care of all of my financial concerns and so on. But I had one other major concern, and that is that between the time I had filled out all of my law school applications and the time I was accepted at some law schools, I had fallen in love with a lady who's still with me all these years later. Mary Ellen, where are you? Right here. And she had been accepted and was intending to attend Syracuse University Law School, 500 miles straight up Interstate 81. Well, we waited for much of the summer while we were both on the waiting list at Cornell and Georgetown, like two young lovebirds, that we would both be accepted by these law schools to attend, so we could go to school together. That didn't happen, so we were very late getting to Syracuse to get her set up, and then I was going to have this 500-mile commute. And things just didn't go right at Syracuse at all. The financial aid form was going to have to be resubmitted by Mary Ellen. The housing was no longer available so late in the year. The courses were not right. I can't remember all the details. What I do remember was sitting in the parking lot and asking her to marry me and come down to Lexington, Virginia, which she did. Yeah. But that didn't end her ambition to become an attorney. So she went, after we were married in Lee Chapel, she went to visit Dean Steinheimer and talk about the possibility of her being admitted to the school the following year. And he told her exactly what she needed to do, and being the outstanding student that she is, she went and got all that done, and the dean was very proud to admit her to the school the next year. And we became the first married couple attending Washington and Lee Law School together, because she was in about the third class that had admitted women. And the dean was very proud of us. And the dean really did look after his students. I remember one occasion that was, at that time, seemed so important in my life, where he overruled, I should say, in my favor, a dispute I had with Roger Group. I'll tell you what, that was one of the more intimidating experiences of my life, certainly of my law school career. But the dean stood up for me and worked things out so that I could continue with the plans that I had. And that was wonderful. I left here, went to work for the congressman who represented Lexington, lived in Roanoke. Mary Ellen went down to Roanoke, began a practice of law. After a few years, wound up with a firm with many W&L alums, and historic, as well as Eggleston, Holton, Butler, and Glenn. Linwood Holton, later governor of Virginia, Caldwell Butler, the fellow that I subsequently went to work for. And today it's Glenn, Feldman, Darby, and Goodlatte. I've stayed in touch with Dean Steinheimer over the years. I represented him in Congress for many, many years. And the last time I saw him was a little over a year ago when I went to visit him at Kendall. And we talked, as we always did, about what was going on in the Congress. And I told him that I was proud of the fact that I was the first chairman of the House Judiciary Committee from Virginia in 125 years. And even prouder of the fact that the last chairman had been the dean of Washington and Lee University School of Law, and the person for whom Tucker Hall is named. John Randolph Tucker served as the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee from 1883 to 1887. His portrait hangs right outside Nora's office, and we need to negotiate whether we can hang that in the House Judiciary Committee. But in any event, he was very proud of that fact. But I told him that I would not have had any of those opportunities if it had not been for him. And not just landing in Lewiston, Maine, of all places, and interviewing me, but for being the kind of activist dean with a compassion and caring for everything going on around him and everyone going on around him that Dean Steinheimer was. So thank you for letting me share that with you. It was a great honor, and I'm going to stop before I join Pam in having a John Boehner moment.
My name is Chip Johnson. I'm a member of the class of 1985. One of the advantages of being near the very end is that it's easy because a lot of what maybe you were wanting to say has already been said. I couldn't help but think, listening to Darlene Moore's comments, that about Dean Steinheimer's letter writing abilities, that it was unfortunate that he never taught a course to judges on judicial opinion writing. My class, and let me just begin by thanking Elizabeth Branner for bestowing upon me the honor of being able to say a few words in tribute to Dean Steinheimer. The class of 1985 was the last class during the Steinheimer era as dean. He stepped down in the spring of 1983, which was at the conclusion of my class's first year. My class, like all other classes and all other students, we referred to Roy Steinheimer by his first name, Dean. Or, as we would say, and as we did then and as we still do now, the Dean. And of course, I remember his exquisite wardrobe of sports coats, and he was one of the few individuals, I think, that could get away with wearing stripes and plaids. I also have, in reflecting, and he was a truly amazing and remarkable man. And I remember after some of his lectures that he would stand out in the hall and he would light up a cigarette, and it was a Camel filterless cigarette. Anybody who's ever been a former smoker knows that's hardcore. And what's even amazing is that he lived to be 98 years old. I think you could sum up his tenure as dean of the law school is really with one word: transformative. It was transformative in the sense that he transformed the law school from an all-male law school. He transformed the law school from being on one of the buildings on the colonnade in cramped quarters to this outstanding facility here. And while the Lewises donated the money, or the bulk of the money that resulted in that enabled the construction of this building, I want to go on record as saying to the president of the university that if there's ever another addition or wing to this building, it should bear the name of Roy Steinheimer. The third area of transformation is what's been alluded to by taking the law school from what was maybe a Virginia school, a regional school, and making it nationally known. And of course, everybody's alluded to his abilities as a pilot, his plane, the nickname Sky Dean. And that was important in recruiting students from all over the United States to come here. And it was important in transforming this law school into a nationally known law school that's very prominent. But I was reading the book right outside the Moot Court Room here, where there were a lot of remembrances and comments on Dean Steinheimer. And it said that when he took over the law school, it was not uncommon for a lot of the students, when he became dean, a lot of the students had graduated from Washington Lee undergrad or graduated from VMI. And so he was going to change that and, again, recruit nationally. But I will say, and I know I speak for those who happen to have earned their undergraduate degree here at Washington and Lee, or those individuals like myself who earned their undergraduate degree at that institution next door, that we were extremely grateful that he totally did not shut the door to those who earned a college degree here in Lexington. Equally important, as a dean, I think Roy Steinheimer was just a phenomenal professor. He's an intimidating, imposing figure. I can't replicate his voice, but he was an incredible lecturer. And I remember when when he announced his retirement, I mean, members of my class were hoping that he was going to still stay around and teach commercial transactions, and we were fortunate that he did. And I remember those lectures, and if he did call on you, you would not want to be unprepared, because if you were, it was like letting down your father. And he may have had some notes, but he didn't need them. After all, he was one of the founding fathers of the Uniform Commercial Code. And I say this, and I had Professor Grunwald as a professor, so no disrespect, but in the 30 years since I graduated from the law school, and even in this day and age of the internet and with law libraries online now, I still keep one book from my W&L days, and that was the selected commercial statutes, the Uniform Commercial Code, that in Comtrans 1 and Comtrans 2, when I had Dean Steinheimer, and it's got all my notations. And what was interesting in looking back is in my years as a commercial litigator, before I became a judge, and even as a judge, I've had a number of UCC issues. So I've benefited tremendously from having Roy Steinheimer as a law professor, because a lot of those complex terms and issues that were dealt with, I had to deal with in terms of whether it's representing a particular client, a bank, in terms of whether the bank's security interest extended to some of the ranchers' livestock, or involved in bankruptcy cases, whether the bank had properly perfected its lien. So the practical benefit of having Roy Steinheimer was immensely beneficial to me. I meant to say this earlier, I do have a regret, and my regret is that back in late 2001, when the Senate confirmed my nomination to the federal bench, that I did not take the time and write a letter to Dean Steinheimer thanking him for what he did and for the positive impact that he had on my career. So if he's by chance, watching this proceeding today from above, I'll say a belated thank you. The book out there and others have referenced stories about being Royed, and I had one experience where I had called Darlene and made an appointment to see the dean my first year. And right before I started Washington Lee Law School, I had just finished. Finished up at the officer basic course of the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I had to then get in my car, and I had about 10 days to get back here to start law school. And so I was serving in the reserves and working part-time, and then took out some student loans. So I was financing my own education. And so when it was time in the spring to do the financial aid forms and the student loan forms, W&L required me to list my parents' income, and I was kind of incensed about this because they weren't putting me through law school. So I decided that I was going to politely and respectfully tell the dean that my parents' income was none of Washington Lee's business. So I made the appointment with Darlene, and I went in to his office and seated across the desk from him, and I made my case. And then, in a very short and concise few sentences, he essentially told me that there were rules and procedures for the student loan forms that W&L required, and that they were what they were, and they weren't going to be changed simply because I didn't agree with it. And that was essentially the end of the meeting. And I was trying to think what that experience was like, and the only other experience I ever had like that, and I'll relate this back to my days as a cadet, but if you violated any of the rules or the regulations at VMI, you would get summoned into a commandant's office. You would have to come in, salute, stand at attention, and it was a very intimidating process. And even though I was seated across the desk from Dean Steinheimer, it was every bit as intimidating, if not more, from the days when I had to go and stand in front of the commandant and salute. And so I would say that today I'm standing and I'm saluting a truly, truly amazing and remarkable man. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is William Tolles, and I'm the current president of the Law Council. During yesterday's Law Council meeting, the Law Council approved a resolution honoring Dean Steinheimer that I'd like to share with you this morning. Whereas Roy Lee Steinheimer Jr. was a visionary leader of the Washington and Lee School of Law while serving as dean from 1968 to 1983. Continuing as the revered Robert E.R. Huntley, class of 50 and 57 law, professor of law until 1987, and as an emeritus member of the Law Council from 1986 to 1990. And whereas former W&L President Robert E.R. Huntley, class of 50, 57 law, has observed that the law school faced daunting challenges when Dean Steinheimer arrived, and that he led the community effort which strengthened the faculty, the curriculum, and the student body in every dimension, playing the leading role in making the law school a national institution and a model for legal education. Whereas W&L President Ken Ruscio, class of 76, describes Dean Steinheimer's impact as profound and as having shaped the law school of today more than any other individual. Whereas for a generation of W&L law students, the Sky Dean will be remembered fondly for the force of his intellect, his leadership, and teaching skills, particularly in AAM classes, his legendary sport coats, his passion for legal education, the success of the students he had responsibility for as professor and dean, and the strengthening of Washington and Lee. Whereas in 1983, the law faculty established the Roy Steinheimer Jr. Commercial Law Award, and a tribute to his status as a leading author and teacher of the Uniform Commercial Code. Whereas Dean Steinheimer was elected to honorary membership in Omicron Delta Kappa in 1983. Whereas Dean Steinheimer was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws in May 1999, and whereas in 2000 many alumni and friends created the Steinheimer Scholarship. Whereas in 2004 many alumni and friends created the Steinheimer Professorship of Law, and whereas Dean Steinheimer's colorful portrait shall hang in Lewis Hall as a permanent tribute to his distinguished service. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Law Council of the Washington and Lee School of Law salutes Roy Lee Steinheimer Jr., noting with great sorrow his 2015 passing at the age of 98, and commemorates his life, his singular service to Washington and Lee, and his sterling legacy. A copy of this resolution shall be furnished to his daughters, Sarah Pugh Dix, class of 86 law, and Susan Pugh Morton, and maintained in the permanent records of the Law Council. Resolved, Washington and Lee University Law Council, April 17, 2015. William Tolles.
Thank you, all of you. What a morning. It's just been wonderful to remember the Dean, who will always be the Dean. A couple of things we wanted to talk to you about in terms of celebrating the Dean that will continue on throughout the day. As many have mentioned, there is a tribute book out in the hallway, and if others would like to share their remembrances, we encourage you to do that so we can keep those as a part of the history of Washington and Lee. And we are encouraging everyone to wear Madras jackets this evening if you have one handy. And I am pleased to say that Sarah and Susan have actually brought one of the Dean's Madras jackets to be on display this evening. It was the last jacket he wore, and so we're very excited that that will be here. And also, at our reception this evening, we have a drink in the Dean's honor called the Madras. So, in the continuing theme. And we welcome everyone to make toast this evening prior to dinner under the tent. And finally, in relation to what Chip said about a wing to the law school in Dean Steinheimer's name, we will not be adding a wing. However, With the renovations that will be completed this summer, I'm pleased to let you know that the class of '81 has raised funds to name a portion of the law school after Dean Steinheimer, and so his name will be in the law school for eternity. So, thank you very much. We're going to take a few minutes break, and we'll be back with the Law Alumni Association meeting, say 11:15. Thank you.